Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the West Virginia Archives and History Library. Tonight we have Barbara Hicks Lacy. It's going to be our block series speaker for the evening. Some of our upcoming lectures here in the Archives Library: Incidents of Morgan's Raid, with an account of Stovepipe Johnson's retreat through West Virginia, by Brian Stewart Festerson. That's on September 2nd at 6 o'clock right here in the library. On September 11th at 6 o'clock, Bobby Taylor will present Family Heritage Music. That's right here in the library. And on September 25th at 6 o'clock, James Est will be our next block speaker series. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mackenzie. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very well for coming tonight. And the first thing I want to do this afternoon is give honor to Dr. Arlena. Do you know him very, very well? I spoke to him on the phone a couple of times, and reading about him, very impressed with what he's done, his accomplishments, and coming from Garnet High School. Real impressive. That school has a rich history of pioneers, individuals who have achieved tremendously amount. And I want you to think about him, his accomplishments, and give honor to him September 6th, the First Baptist at 1 o'clock for his memorial service. The Block Speaker Series, as you know, is an effort from our organization, the West Virginia Center for African American Art and Culture, to highlight not only individuals, but groups of accomplishments in the area of Charleston that are bounded by what's now a historic district, since to Capitol Street, bounded by Washington and Smith Street on north and south ends. It's Charleston's first and only local historic district, because most of the historic districts you'll find in federally designated areas have quite a bit of more structures in them. This one, as you noticed on the signs outside the door, only has 5 sites on the National Register of Historic Places, and we want to preserve those as much as we can and relay the history that they have and the individuals that these places are named after and what they've accomplished. I want to give credit to my board of directors who are here today. One of them I noticed is Clarion Carter. Other board directors, Mr. Casey James, who, as you don't know or you might know, is in the hospital. He's ill as well, and I want you to keep him in your prayers and think about him and he gets well. Other board members, Tony Lee and Obi Henderson. And Joe Tyree is a member of our North Side Historic Community Group, who are instrumental in facilitating this Block Historic District project. Thanks to him and Casey, we have achieved quite a bit of things in the area, and we want to continue doing that with your help. Speaker tonight, as you know, Ms. Barbara Hicks Lacy, has a very detailed schematic of the block and Shrewsbury Street, and I'm sure that she will bring a lot of memories in you. And I'm happy to see that you come tonight and socialize, talk, and reminisce. And I think Ms. Lacy will continue that as she talks about her experiences and her lifelong ties to the block. And so, Mr. James Press Estes will be here next month, September 25th. And I'm sure that each and every one of you know him. I've had the opportunity to meet him a few times, and I'm still very impressed with him as well. Mr. Estes will be our last speaker in this Block Speaker Series. And as we plan for next year, beginning in May, I hope you put it on your calendar, beginning in May of 2015, we begin again with our Block Speaker Series. And we'll be talking to individuals to plan and schedule those lectures next year as I said, beginning in May. So expect mailing from me, emails from me, or speaking to me at some point over the next 6 to 7 months leading up to our May speaker series. And I'd like to introduce Ms. Barbara Hicks Lacy.
The first thing I want to do is to apologize for that chart. That was my basic chart. That's what I started working with and everything. And when I gave it to Anthony, I explained to him that that's what it was. Okay? But it is what it is, okay? From the time I was born until I was 6 years old, I lived at 420 Shrewsbury Street, which is right in the middle of the 400 block. And there have been some sessions about the site itself and the businesses and whatever. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about the people in my neighborhood. And it was really a neighborhood. Okay, I'm going to start, you may be able to follow me a little bit, at the M&S drugstore. That was a hangout. It was a hangout for everybody, and especially the high school kids and the people. The M&S was owned by Doctors Mitchell and Solomon, thus M&S. It was a drugstore. It sold food, they had milkshakes, ice cream, cosmetics, newspapers, the whole 9 yards. So we're at the M&S. Now we're going to move on up, and if we go right beside the M&S, there was the West Virginia restaurant. The West Virginia restaurant was owned by my godfather. His name was Roy Holmes, but everybody called him Deacon. And I didn't know until I was a teenager that he had special coffee. If you came into his restaurant and asked for special coffee, they always went into the pop refrigerator, you know, the ones with the tops that pull back, the pop came out of, and they poured that special coffee in a coffee cup there. Okay. So anyhow, moving right along, the next place is the Annex Barbershop. It was owned by Mr. David Scott, but that was Flattar's Barbershop. Now, Mr. Flattar, I think got his name from what I was told. He was limp in one leg, lame, and he limped. And someone said, "You move like a car with a flat tire." That was it. From that point on, and even forevermore, he was flat tire. Okay. Next, there was a cab stand. And there was Miss Grace, and she was a dispatcher. But it was the Red Star Cab. It was the only black cab company in town, maybe in West Virginia. And they had 2 cabs, okay? But that was their dispatcher office. The next place was at almost the end of the Brown building. There was a door. And you walked upstairs to Willard Brown's office. But if you didn't go up the stairs, there was a little hallway, and you could walk back in there and get special coffee. And it was appropriately named the Tight Squeeze. We're moving on. There was a 1-story house next door to the Brown building, and it changed ownership several times. And at one time, my godparents lived there, but some other people lived there. There was a walkway between that house and the dog wagon. There was a little bus-looking, trailer-looking thing where a guy sold food, and we called it the dog wagon. So in between the house and the dog wagon, there was a walkway. Now, if you went through that walkway, you'd end up behind the Ferguson Theater, behind the Ferguson Hotel in Spurlock Alley. Coming back to Spurlock later. Next door was a nice little lady who lived by herself, and her name was Miss Yancey. And Miss Yancey had rumors also, and I think that's how most of her support was gained, through her rumors. Next to that was the first Preston Funeral Home. It was Preston Lawson Funeral Home, and it was at 416 Shrewsbury Street. Okay, we're going next door. Next door, the community referred to it as a day nursery, but it wasn't a day nursery. It was a residential home for black foster children. And there were always 8 or 10 children there living. There was a shelter on Washington Street and Cent Street, the Davis Child Shelter, but we were in the period of segregation, so therefore they had to come to that one. Okay, now we're at my house. Yes, sirree. My mom had boarders, and some of them worked for the city garbage. One was a chauffeur, and one was just a handyman somewhere. But they just always brought me presents galore. And if somebody had thrown out some nice little cribs or baby buggies, or that, and they were clean and they looked nice, I got them. When they came home, they brought them to me. Next door to me were Mr. and Mrs. Robinson. Mr. Robinson was a carpenter, and Mrs. Robinson was a social worker. Then we're going to move to the big house next door. That was 424 Shrewsbury Street, and that's where Mr. Brown lived, Mr. Anderson Brown. His son Willard, his daughter Della Louise, and his sister Della. Next door to them was the cook, was Pal's barber shop, a beauty shop. And Miss Mabel Cook was the manager or whatever, and she had 2 other people. One of the other beauticians was the wife of Mr. Flatter. Next to there was a restaurant, and it was run by 2 sisters, Edna and Sadie Small, on that restaurant. We're moving over a little bit. There's another walkway, and behind 424, behind the Anderson, Mr. Brown's house, the Prices lived. There was Miss Price, and she had 2 adult children, a son and a daughter. So we're going to come right back out that way, and there was Mr. and Mrs. Martin. Okay? And Mr. Martin did some kind of domestic work for families in general. And Miss Martin was a homemaker. At the very corner, 432 Shrewsbury Street, it was the parsonage for First Baptist Church. We're going to cross the street, and that puts us at Garnet. Next to Garnet was a big brick house, and the weird thing about it was almost a purple brick. It was a brownish purple brick, but that's where the Cooks lived. Miss Cook and her daughter Mabel, who had the beauty shop across the street, and her son Nathan. Then beside that house was Miss James. Miss James was a little lady I didn't know too much about, but she was friendly, and she had a piano. So I would visit her constantly to go play her piano. Couldn't play a lick, but that's okay. So she kind of looked for me, and she was kind of lonely. The next house that way back, almost on Dickerson Street, was a little house. And that's where Uncle Amy and Aunt Bob lived. I do not know how I happened to call them Uncle Amy and Aunt Bob, but that's who they were, and they were forevermore. Oh, now, at 413 Shrewsbury Street, where the foundation building is now, it wasn't until I was older that I found out what type of establishment it was. There were 5 at least nice-looking young ladies that were on the porch and on the steps and wherever during the day, and they all would talk to me and they'd give me money and have go back, ice cream and chewing gum and whatever. And I found out later what was going on over there. But there was a gentleman there, and his name was Douglas Hogan. And I'm going to speak of him as the personnel manager. Okay, we're moving right along. Next door, the Huskins lived. Mr. Huskins worked at the post office. Miss Huskins was a teacher, and they had 2 children, Jackie and Will. Next to the Huskins were the Martins, another set of Martins. And Miss Martin had a beauty shop in the back of her house. Mr. Martin, I think, was the chauffeur also. And their niece came to live with them, Daisy Ann Freeman. So you all might remember. Now we're at the Elks Club. And it was the jewel of the block. I mean, it took up a lot of space, and the Elks were very active. And there's a little thing about the Elks that, unless you lived there, you didn't know. Someone either went, I don't know how it happened, but one of the members of the Elks Club figured that we needed to know something about wildlife. So he caught a raccoon. And he put the raccoon in the back of the club in a cage, okay? And we named him Billy. That, you know, every pet was Billy. Okay, Billy the goat, Billy the raccoon, Billy the whatever. And on the day on the trip, we'd go back and feed Billy. Billy was awful. I mean, he was not, I was scratching on the cage and hissing at you and everything, but we would go back and feed Billy. Now, the Elks Club was, I don't know, it was, like I said, the jewel to the community. And they supported so many things. And I remember that when they went to their national conventions out of town, they always took the Garnet band. Now, I like that because they would practice on the street. Normally, they would practice in the gym. But we could march up and down the street beside them because they were practicing, you know, marching around the streets. So one year they went to Philadelphia and they went on a bus, and then another year they went somewhere else and they took them on a train. And the Elks just did an awful lot of things for the school and for the community. And the head of the brotherhood, the most loyal, I don't know what the title is. Do you know what the title is for the head chief in the Elks? Anybody know? The most royal, half-looty, or whatever? Huh? Hmm? Oh yeah, but he has some more things, you know, like most royal, half-looty, coochie, whatever. Now, next to the Elks Club was the cab stand. That's where they kept the 2 cabs. Then next to that was Dr. Gravely's drugstore, okay? Now we're on the west corner, okay? And we're going down Washington Street toward the Methodist Church. Dr. Gravely, a pool room, and my daddy's restroom. My daddy's restroom was at 908 East Washington Street. This is going to be important later on. You know, we did that in St. Mark's Church. And Firestone, and the post office. Okay, now I'm going to go across Shrewsbury Street again. I'm going to start right there at the M&S, and I'm going to move up to John's. There was a little lunch place called John's, and it was one of 3 white businesses in the area. John had several stools and a little narrow spot and whatever, and he sold lunches, basically. Now, the important thing about John is that John had a cousin that came to help him and wash dishes and stuff in the late 40s. His cousin's name was Spiro Stanley. And John's dishwasher, I don't know whether you all know, but Spiro was also George Stephanopoulos' uncle. Spiro's mother, Spiro's sister is George Stephanopoulos' mother, the TV man. Okay, but from this meager start of washing dishes at his cousin's restaurant, he ended up owning half of Charleston. Next was Mr. Brown's realty office, and then next was the Ferguson Theater, and there was a restaurant and a hallway leading upstairs to the Ferguson Hotel. The Ferguson Hotel. In order to get in the Ferguson Hotel, you had to go down a long hall. There were about 6 steps in a platform, and then some steps, maybe 10 that went up here. And you were at the desk. I didn't do anything illegal or anything at the hotel. I used to play with the Ferguson girls. Okay, Mr. Ferguson had 6 girls, and 2 of them were around my age. But a lot of people were also permanent residents of the hotel. Well, I'll say at least 5 to 10 families, stayed there. I wanted to mention they lived on the 3rd floor, and the most amazing thing to me was when you went in their living room, they had a grand piano. And how in the world they got their grand piano up there? I mean, they must have invented something. Because the windows were very large, and even if you turned it upright, took the legs out and turned it upright, it didn't seem like it would fit to me, but they did have a grand piano. Okay, now I'm coming out again, and I'm right there at the corner of the hotel, going toward Broad Street, and I'm in Spurlock Alley. Right behind the hotel, there was a joint that a gentleman named Mr. Penn had. And this is one of the things I don't think my mother knew very much about. And in fact, I don't think she knew anything about it. But I used to go to the movie all the time, and I would see Shirley Temple, and I'd see our gang and everything. And I felt that I was Shirley Temple, but I just hadn't been discovered. So this gentleman had been a roomer in my mother's house, and he had this little joint. And from time to time, when I was making my rounds, I'd go in, and he'd sit me on the bar, and I'd sing, "Nighttime is the right time." Don't laugh, that was before quarter. They would dance these nickels, and shoot, I was into it. So I don't think mother knew about that. I'm going up the alley, and I'm coming to the Watkins family. Miss Roberta, Mr. Tom, Tommy, and Elizabeth lived on that side. Then I'm going up a little bit farther, and the Scott family lived there. Miss Christine Scott, her daughter, and her grandson Scott. And when we go across here, almost where the barber shop is on the First Baptist lot, there was another business. And this man had a print shop. It looked like a garage, but his name was Rudy, and he had a print shop. And keeping up to my right, the Tatums lived there. Mr. and Mrs. Tatum, Julia and Thelma lived right there. And right on the edge of Lewis Street and Spurlock Alley, the Robbins lived. June Robbins, his sister, and Mr. and Mrs. Robbins. And Mr. Robbins was a fireman, okay? Okay, going back there, we're going to start a little bit with the demise of the block and what happened with the expansion of both the post office and the St. Mark's Church. When St. Mark's decided they wanted to expand, that did away with the 3 businesses from the corner to the church. And it also got rid of the cab stand, the Elks Club, the Martin home, and the Huskins home, because they cleared it out all the way up to 413. Okay? And my dad moved his restaurant up the street to under the Ferguson Hotel. Okay? Now, that's kind of significant with some other stuff I'm going to tell you, because I started working in the restaurant. When I was 6 years old, I got up one morning and my mother was asleep, and I decided I was going to cook my breakfast. I was 6. And you had to go behind the stove to get a light from the pallet on the tank. And I had on a flannel gown, and I folded the paper all up, and I lit it, and it burned my hand. It fell on my gown. I caught on fire, and I had 2nd and 3rd degree burns over 2/3 of my body. So I was in school, and I had to be out of school, and it took me a while to recover. I had to learn to walk again. I'm telling you all this because that's when I went to live with my father. And I lived over on the west side. He did. And I had the most wonderful, non-fairy tale stepmother that you would ever imagine. She was just a wonderful person. And while I was getting used, she worked at the restaurant also, but while I was getting used to being there, she took off from the restaurant. And after, I guess, maybe about 6 months, 9 months, she went back to work. And my schedule was to go to school, come home and change clothes, and catch the bus and ride to town. No problem. I was a half a block from the bus stop, and I could get off at Farstown, okay? And so I did this and did this. When I was in my 20s, people were talking about television babysitting. Ferguson Theater babysat me. Seriously, I went just about every day. It didn't cost but a dime, and popcorn was a dime, and you could get a drink for a nickel, you know, so if you got a quarter, you were home free. And that's what we did. All the kids in the neighborhood, we went to the movie every day, whether we'd seen it or not. And on Saturdays, you know. And when we got a little bit older, some of the kids didn't have money to get in, so we talked about that back door of the theater, the little cut, and somebody might be assigned to put some paper or something in the block, you know, close the door, and then, you know, later on, someone would be sitting up front and they'd knock on the door, okay, and if it was safe, you let them in. But, you know, we were not bad children. When I was in high school, everything was really segregated, and I really enjoyed working at the restaurant, particularly when the rhythm and blues people were coming to town and there was going to be a dance. And I got to meet an awful lot of them because the only place they could eat was on the block somewhere. And they had to stay at the Ferguson or the Brown Hotel. There was a Brown Hotel on Capitol and Garnet Street. And so that afforded me a lot of connections with famous people. Now, I worked on the block for my dad until 1957. And then I got a job for the state, and that was it. Now, anybody got any questions? I want to close with something that I found. I love poetry, and I particularly love Paul Dunbar. And this is a verse from a poem by Paul Dunbar called The Old Homestead. And it says, now the old place is deserted and the walls have fallen down. All who made the home life cheerful now have died or moved out of town. But about the old homestead, my memories shall ever cling, for 'twas there I spent my youth, life's happy spring. Thank you.
I've been working on a book on the block, and mine is the early history of the block and my family history. I'd like to briefly tell the people about some of my family history on the block.
Well, when you continue putting that together, we'll even allow you to come here and speak to the audience, as Ms. Lacy has. As you continue putting that together, we'll allow you to come and speak to the audience as Ms. Lacy has, and talk more about that too. But not now, Ms. Porter. But the archives also has, I'd like to make you aware that the funeral records for the Hardin Gilmore home are categorized in alphabetical order and by year, and they're available here at the archives for you to research and gain information about the services that Ms. Gilmore had put together and the individuals that she was had the opportunity to service and be acquainted with the families and everything that went with those services. They also have the insurance records for Shrewsbury Street and the block as well. So if you'd like to research that information, that's also here. We'd like to eventually get as many records for the black community in Charleston, in the Shrewsbury Street area as we can, so you can research, learn as much as you can about the community as it was and as it is here now. And for younger generations to know how the community was, who was in the community, as the previous speakers, Thomas W. Tyree, Charles James III, and as Ms. Lacy has mentioned, the individuals that have shaped their lives and within the community. But as you came through the door, you saw historic markers that had been placed in the block. There's one across from the Clay Center that talks about the general history of the black community in the block. And when during the Great Black Migration in the 30s, individuals would come from the South and come across the mountains. And the first place they came was in Charleston, at the bottom of that mountain. And as Ms. Lacy said, the only place they could eat was the restaurant that was on the block and the Ferguson Hotel. Some of them stayed and some of them moved on to the other parts of Ohio and Michigan and northern to gain a better way of life. There are also 2 markers on Shrewsbury Street, one at the Best Western and one at Simpson Church, that outlines a brief history of what the diverse culture of the block was like. There were Syrians, there were whites, and there were Lebanese and Italians who also lived and had businesses in the block. I'd like to have a connection with them, have them come and speak as well. Talk about their relation to the individuals that were at the block, who visited their businesses, who were friendly with them. And as a lot of them have said, they were friendly all day and every day. The only time they were segregated is when they went to school. They knew each other very well, and they continue to know each other very well. And that's the enthusiasm and the history that I want to bring out within these speaker series. History is history, no matter whose it is. It has to be preserved by somebody. The perspective of the person recording that history depends on who it is. If a white person records a history, they're going to record it from their perspective. If a black person records a history, they're going to record it from their perspective. But history is history, no matter who is recording it, and it has to be preserved. So when these block speaker series continue, I'd like for you to share it with your friends. Share it with younger people to know what the block was like and the lifestyle that was lived there. The people who communicated and shared their lives with each other. And that's what I want to bring out. Right now, I have a very good gift from Miss Lacy. Would you come back over, please? From our organization, the West Virginia Center for African American Art and Culture, we present you with this decorative glass. I'd like to thank Dr. Freya Barkey, Ms. Chlorine Carter, and by the way, Dr. Freya Barkey was very instrumental in suggesting that we put a marker on Shrewsbury Street by the Best Western. As I was determining where to put it on the sidewalk and have the city create a place for us for that marker on the sidewalk, Dr. Barkey said, well, Anthony, why don't you put it over there? by the Best Western, behind the pool, where there's a flower bed, where there's already a place available for something this important and this tremendous. And as it turns out, talking with the corporate office of Best Western, they were very supportive of the idea. They're very supportive of what we're doing, and continue to make those connections with that marker and the Best Western. I'd also like to thank you for coming to the Block Speaker Series the last 2 times, and this one especially. And I hope you come out and listen to press. Press comes to town regularly from what I have seen. I've met him a couple of times and had a chance to talk with him, and I'm very impressed with what he has to say and how he says what he says. He has a very special way of saying things, and I like the way he does it. I think you will too. So, September 25th, at 6 o'clock, right here. Share it with your friends. Bring some younger people along so they can understand what our history is like. And what their history is like too. Because the problem is, every generation, every culture faces this problem. Not sharing the history with younger people. You find nieces and nephews have no idea what their grandparents did. No idea what their great-grandparents did. How accomplished they may have been. Unless some stranger tells them. And they're so wide-eyed, they don't have any idea that their relative did this. So, let me repeat that again. Share it with somebody. Bring some younger people with you, so they can be aware of the history that existed in Charleston, in the block, those individuals who had a tremendous role in shaping the block. So, thank you very much for coming, and Look forward to seeing you September 25th. Yes.
Is the perspective of the two previous speakers you had, have they been recorded to where they can be purchased or given to or listened to after the series is over?
Yes, they're available on YouTube. You can view them, listen to them, and if you have the ability to record YouTube, you can do that as well. Someone from the Archives of History would like to comment on that as well.
I think you covered it, Anthony. They're on YouTube. I don't know how long, Dick, maybe a couple of weeks before they're put up online, but they're free, and we certainly encourage you to go and see that, or spread the word to those who weren't able to make it tonight so that they can view that at their leisure.
And if you come to the Archives and History's main page on our website, over on the right-hand side, if you look down, you'll see where you can click to link into our YouTube page.
Well, again, I want to thank Ms. Lacy, and again, I want to thank you for coming.